everybody. Randy Patterson here with Boomerocity. You might notice that there's no virtual background here. Nothing fancy behind me except my Christmas tree, the official Boomerocity Christmas tree made out of an old drum set. Um, this is a unique situation here. Let me give you a little bit of background. 13 years ago, I was introduced to Dan Peak by a mutual friend of ours. That mutual friend was Steve Orchard, a DJ up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. He's the DJ for WOBE. And Steve's a great guy. Rob Parisi of Wild Cherry refers to him as the Jimmy the Greek of rock and roll. And that's true because Steve has a lot of data knowledge about record sales and things of that nature. Wonderful guy. Anyway, he introduced Dan Peak and I to each other. And Dan Peak, as you know, is a co-founder or was the co-founder of America, and you know their hits. So we arranged via email, Dan and I did, to interview, to set up an interview. And long story short, he wound up leaving his home in the Caribbean to be up with family in Missouri to take care of a couple of medical emergencies, one with his dad and one with a niece. And while they were there, there was a horrible storm going on. And so we were at risk of having to cut the interview short, which we did, but we got back together a couple days later. As you'll notice in this first part, and this interview is in two parts, we did a lot of casual chit chat, and I debated whether to keep it in there because it might bore a lot of you. But I wanted you to hear what I think to be the real Dan Peak, as friends knew him at least, probably a little bit deeper side to him with family, but this was a pretty laid back conversation, and I loved it. It was as if we were sitting in a living room somewhere just chatting and feet up on the coffee table and drinking iced tea or something. And I was struck by it. Now, keep in mind, this was 2 years into Boomerocity's life. I'd only founded Boomerocity a couple years before, so I'm still pretty new at this stuff at that time and still have a lot of room for improvement. So I'm in awe of this guy. I'd heard a lot about him, of course, through America and loved his Christian music as well. And so, anyway, the interview did get cut short. The first part of the interview took place on June 27th of 2011. And because it got cut short, we agreed to get back together on the 29th. And we carried on with our conversation. Very kind, very gracious, very accommodating. Like I said, absolutely loved talking with him. Almost a month to the day after that last conversation, I sat down to transcribe the interview. It was very early in the morning. I worked from home. I was in the North Dallas area at the time, and I get an email just as I'm getting ready to start transcribing the audios from our mutual friend Steve Orchard, and he said, "Are you sitting down?" And I believe I wrote back, "Steve, it's 5:30 in the morning. I should be laying down. What's up?" Being a little snarky. "Sorry, Steve." And he said, "I just got word that Dan had died overnight." And I was stunned, absolutely stunned. I know his family had to be heartbroken. And I just couldn't transcribe that morning. It took me a couple days, but I eventually got around to transcribing it. And I put the interviews out in the two parts that the conversations took place. And during that whole time, I reached out to his producer um, of the Christian music. His name is Chris Christian. He's renowned in contemporary Christian music circles. And anyway, I will include that audio in part two. And we were both just very stunned by the news. So to get back to this story, we got everything put together and rolled out. Now, over the years, people have wanted to hear this audio. I did put together, I combined the two audio files and gave it to the family for them to have for their records, for their solace. And but other than that, only one or two very close friends and colleagues have heard it, but I've never given it out. And so this is the first time I'm making the audio available for the world to listen to, for all you fans. The audio was referenced in Jude Warren's great book entitled America the Band. If you don't have it already, I highly, highly recommend that you get her book. It's very well written, very well documented, and very much blessed by the family and by Dewey and Jerry of America. So I recommend you get that and enjoy it because if you're an America fan, you will enjoy it. But this is the first offering of the audio. This is part one. We had to cut it off short due to the storms that were taking place up in in Missouri, and I think there was also some additional family stuff Dan had to run off to, but we circled back. And so please do listen to part two of this. That'll be coming up the following week, or depending when you're hearing this, it will be you can find it in on this platform. I've punched up the audio quality as best I could. It's very echoey. I had no idea when I was recording this that I would eventually start a podcast and make it available to the world. At that time, I only transcribed and wrote articles based on the transcription. So, but I do hope you enjoy the casual atmosphere that the conversations took place. Very matter of fact, very point blank, and very raw. I mean, Dan was Dan. You know, he had some controversy around him, but everybody still have a lot and still has a love for him today, as they did back then. So, without any further ado, I present to you my first part of a two-part interview with Dan Peek. Please like it. Please subscribe. Please share it. Until next time, this is Randy Patterson with Boomerocity. Take care. Mr. Peek.
Hey, how you doing? It's Randy?
Yes, sir, it is. How you doing?
Oh, all right. All right. Can't complain. We're just dodging tornadoes up here like dodgeballs.
Are you really?
Yeah, it's just been crazy. I decided to come back and visit my folks, and so it's just making it even easier to call you. My dad had taken a bad fall, and I had a niece who was nearly died in childbirth, so the whole family just sort of made it a family reunion and came up to sort of lend support for my dad and my niece, and but he's on the mend, and my niece is okay, and she finally delivered the baby after like 3 days of intensive labor.
Bless her heart. She's got to be like exhausted.
Man. Yeah.
Man.
That's so it's all good, but man, the weather up here is just crazy.
Whereabouts are you calling from?
Near St. Louis.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And it's just been, one major storm after another, and but I guess tornadoes are popping up everywhere. So.
Wow. Well, just
you're in where are you at?
I'm in the Dallas area.
So you're getting some heat.
Oh gosh, yeah.
Dangerous heat, yeah.
Yeah, it's been pretty bad. I have two little Pekingese that normally are at my feet. One right now they're separated, and I don't know what they're up to. But when I let them out, I've got to make sure I remember that I have them outside. I mean, it's kind of shaded on the backyard, but with their long hair, gosh, you just got to be careful about the heat and all that. But
absolutely,
I grew up in Arizona, so it's all relative, I guess. So
yeah.
Well, listen, if for whatever reason you need to drop because of tornado warnings or your dad or whatever the case may be, hey, this is, we'll do what we need to do to take care of things. So
it's actually a perfect little lull between storms, and I checked the radar map, and the last one blew through here about an hour ago, and it's smooth sailing probably till later this afternoon, and I've got my brother here and his wife and brothers and sisters are over kind of, ministering to my father's needs. So I've kind of got the day off from that. So
good deal.
This is good.
Well, on a side note, I worked for about 4 years in Northwest Arkansas, and so I was just right down the road from Joplin. And man, just to see some familiar areas around there. I'm a Bonnie and Clyde history buff, and so there's the site of the famous shootout that happened there in Joplin. So I was very familiar with that whole area, and and that tornado where all that devastation was just like 3 or 4 blocks from where that shootout took place. But apparently it's still intact. But man, what tragedies around there! Gosh.
Yeah, it's just heartbreaking. It's hard to imagine going on after something like that. I think I would be hard pressed to stay and rebuild. I'd want to go somewhere else. I think it just
absolutely.
The things we've seen, of Joplin. Of course, the news focuses in on the destruction, but there was sure a whole lot of it to focus in on, and it's galvanized pretty much everybody in the state, from police to firemen to ball players and everybody else are going down there to try to lend a hand, and so it's bringing out some community spirit in people, but so far it's dodged this area where my folks live pretty good. So
good deal. How long are you going to be up that way?
Probably for another week.
Oh, okay, cool.
So I figured I've come all this way, I might as well hang out. I actually have been doing a blog. I haven't. I kind of hit the wall a couple weeks ago, partly because I just ran out of material, and then the thing with the family health issues. But it's WordPress.com.
Yeah.
Which is pretty biggie, and I'm not getting thousands of hits a day on it or anything, but it's just enough to kind of keep me busy. A few orders roll in, I package them up and ship them out, and but more or less I'm in my twilight years in many ways. So it's my brother and I were talking about it. Was like, if we get too successful, we'll have to hire somebody to do all the licking and sticking and packaging and everything else. But it's. And you mentioned a pastor. I don't know if you're a believer or not.
Yes, I am.
Yeah, praise the Lord. To me, the only reason I even have a website was when I wrote that book, An American Band. I was able to present the gospel, and so to me, that's my ministry tool. I also have a ministry page on my website, which gets into some pretty heavy-duty end-time prophecy issues, but. If it wasn't for that, I would probably not even have a website and just kind of fade away. But it's every time I'm ready to call my brother and say, look, it's over, I'll get an email from someone going, oh, praise God or whatever. I just read your book, or I read your testimony, or I looked at your ministry page and I was so blessed or uplifted or whatever. And it's like, it's like, again, I just have to take it as a sign from God that to just keep on trucking. So,
well, and to that, and just gets way ahead of where I was going to go with you on the questioning and all that. But yeah, we'll say a lot of things on here that I know will need to be either not quoted in the piece or will need to be put in a context that would be digestible to the reader. So and I won't post anything until you give a final blessing on it. So so everything's open and we can speak freely. But one thing I was going to mention along those lines, because I wasn't really sure what you were doing from a touring standpoint and stuff, but there's some people that, first of all, I think the genre of the music from the 60s and 70s obviously still has a very large appeal that gives people such as yourself a platform for whatever it is they want to preach. It may be the gospel, it may be global warming, it may be world peace, whatever. But it's a platform that people gladly pay to see the person that's talking about it, but and if it's mixed in with the music and the memories, then so be it. But people like Rick Derringer, I mean, gosh, just an incredible believer. There's others out there. Pardon me?
Did not know that.
Yeah, he is. He plays Harley festivals and guitar shows, and I mean, he told me, he goes, man, he goes, we get behind the enemy lines, you know.
Yeah.
And I tell you, I got to tell you this, you'll get a big kick out of this. So, are you familiar with the old contemporary Christian rock group Love Song?
I'm not.
They were like early on in the Christian rock scene.
Yeah.
So there'd be like Chuck Girard and Tommy Coombs and all that. Well,
Yeah.
Rick was at the Dallas Guitar Show. This is back in April. And on Sunday mornings, the guy that puts together the show is a believer. And he has a praise and worship service on Sunday mornings of the show. And it's open. It's very lightly attended and all that. But this year, it was Rick and Tommy Coombs that was the founding member of Love Song. And they were playing together and sharing testimony and all that. And Rick slid into a Christian version of Rock and Roll Hoochie Coo. And it was, I mean, normally I'm kind of wincing, going, okay. This was good. This was really, really good. And Tommy Coombs is there, and then they just played off of each other in such a meaningful way. But said all that to say this: these guys still tour, and they're given an opportunity because of the legacy of their past, for better or for worse. It just opens so many doors, and I would hate to see you shut them too soon. So I think there's still a lot out there for you to. A lot of people to reach, and there's still a lot of people that just want to hear you,
And they say that, for every, maybe with email now it's different, but it used to be for every letter you got, that was basically 1,000 people were, would probably write the same letter, but they just don't get around to it,
right.
So, I've got to feel that, when I get an email from someone and they say something, that there's got to be other people out there that feel the same way. They just haven't bothered to send an email. So it's just trying to labor away in the vineyard and till the Lord comes back and gets us out of here. So.
Bottom line, at the end of it all, despite my opinions and other people's opinions, you got to do where you feel God is leading you to do. And sometimes, it's like my cousin, he's a minister, and he said sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do is sleep. And to put that into context on this, sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do is rest and wait and let God show you what to do next.
You're absolutely right.
But I'm already loving this, and we haven't even really got into the questions. But where I was starting off, because I assumed that you would be calling from your home in the islands there. Obviously you're pretty much semi-retired and that type of thing.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming it's where in the Caymans. You said British West Indies, but I'm assuming that's in the Caymans area.
Actually, it's the Bahamas now.
Okay.
It was really a miracle. My wife just, who was a prayer warrior, came out one day and said, "The Lord told me it's time to move." And I thought, "Oh, honey, this is ridiculous. We just spent 8 years rehabbing a 100-year-old house right on the ocean." It was the last thing in the world I wanted to do was move, but she just was adamant, it's time to go, it's time to go. Well, we, put up a for sale, we found this agency that we jibed with, and they hooked us up with the buyer. They made us a very fair offer, very close to the asking price, and we sold, and then we left, and it was heartbreaking because we had made a lot of good friends there. But then within 3 years, Hurricane Ivan struck and just demolished the house that we had been in.
Oh, my God.
Demolished the entire road that we lived on. Pretty much demolished the island, at one point, because the island is so low. Like it's kind of like an atoll where you've got a ring, which is the beach, and the shoreline is actually higher than what's inland.
Oh, wow.
So at one point, they, as the eye of the hurricane passed over, they had to satellite photo, and you could not see the island. It was so covered with water.
Oh my gosh.
There were a lot of deaths and a lot of people whose lives were just, shaken. And miraculously, though, we had these two German ladies who had been our neighbors, who we were just grieving because we thought, oh my gosh, what's happened to them? Well, about 4 years later, we finally get an email, and they said, oh, we too felt the Lord was telling us to move. They were just real on fire for the Lord and prayed and studied and et cetera, et cetera. But long story short, they moved, within months of Ivan hitting, and it was just such a relief to find out these dear ladies had escaped, because those who didn't leave, it was just, horrible. It was a terrible, terrible, terrible event, and we'd already been through losing our house in a fire in California, and I just think everybody just deserves no more than one, one per customer.
That's right.
One total destruction of your home and everything you have, and then I think you should get a free pass for the rest of your life. But that's if I was making the rules, I think I'd make that a rule.
Well, how do you? I've got friends that live in Hawaii and places like that, and they say they feel kind of isolated there. Do you feel isolated where you live in the Bahamas?
Nah, because it's real close to the mainland.
That's true.
And just a short hop over, to get to the mainland, and I'm really a hermit by nature. I just can easily, lock myself up for months on end, and I'm not writing as much now, but I've found that island life, we didn't have a TV, we virtually had no radio, and so I just went through the most creative period of my entire life while we were living on Cayman, and then after having moved, I started going more into writing books and stuff. So I've written the equivalent of probably 6 books, one of which is in paperback, published An American Band, The America Story, available at all the websites. You can get it from my website. I sign it, and they get a free CD, but Amazon, Barnes & Noble, everybody else. And then I just e-published it, and then a follow-up to it called Our Day in the Sun, which was about our 12 years, 15 years of living in the Caribbean prior to leaving, and then of course the Ivan thing, and then but just I you can get rock fever, they call it, and so you have to get off every once in a while. There's locals that I know who've never been more than 20 miles from their home,
Wow.
But most of them are completely insane. I think it takes its toll, so.
Hey, I've seen people like that on the state side. They're no different, so.
Sure, yeah. I've lived in small towns where people had literally never been out of the county, and but there's, again, I don't. I kind of thrive on isolation on some level, and I'm becoming agoraphobic, really, and kind of institutionalized, and that's one reason I really don't do any shows anymore, and I just concentrate more now on writing. Again, not necessarily songs, but I just released a CD called All American Boy. It's available through my website, and then I was going to do one last CD of gospel stuff, and as soon as I laid down the first track, it's like every piece of gear I own broke.
Oh my gosh.
It's like all at one time. Everything. Digital tape machines, the board, just like, oh, is this Satan breaking this because I'm doing this, a gospel record, or is it just, planned obsolescence, and I bought all the gear at roughly the same time. Oh, actually, exactly the same time. So, but just for it all, I mean, all of it to just break within a week. I had I was using the ADATs, they're the VCR tape format, digital audio tapes, and you can stack up 20 of them if you want. But I had 16 tracks. You slave one up to the other one, and then the drum machine to me is that's like having 8 or 9 tracks. So, but one pooped out, and so I thought, well, I'll just use the other one. I rarely anymore go past 8 tracks anyway. So, but I thought, well, great, I've got this other one. It's like a backup. Well, it started going nuts, and then the next thing I knew, the board just completely pooped out, and so it's been very frustrating. So, but the humidity and the salt air and everything else are the enemy anyway. So
corrodes the interiors, and people don't realize that until it's too late. I've seen. I've spent 20 years in the telephony business, and people on the coastal areas don't realize that central office gear can, the salinity just creates all sorts of havoc on the switches and all that.
And just the humidity alone, but when you throw in the salt, it just brutal, just brutal.
So recording like that, though, I mean, you're on the island, and your pickings of session musicians has got to be pretty slim.
I do everything myself.
Do you?
Yeah, I've just gotten to the point where it's just so much easier. I know what I want. I can hear it in my head, and although I can't play every instrument I want to, I can fake it with enough stuff that I usually end up with it's like I have like a 24-track recorder in my brain, and I can then just take whatever's in there and then put it to tape, and so really I'm well pleased, and it really stretched me. Really was a challenge, but I felt like I got better and better and better at my craft the more I did it, and I really love just working solo in terms of the studio. I've worked with Sir George Martin, incredible producer, nice guy. I've worked with some real jerkwads too.
So I've read.
So just to be able to go in and the great thing about having the home studio, these days, for one thing, you don't have to take up an entire warehouse. You can just fit them in a fairly small room, and then if the mood strikes at 8 in the morning or 4 in the afternoon, I don't have to go in and kick somebody out or beg to be allowed to have some studio time. So it's a great way to work, and I've found it to be something that just works for me real good, and like I said, I can't I wish I don't even have a mandolin. I'm sure I would play it. It's got strings, I can play it, but I added some fiddle to a song the other day, and it was, my fiddling is so horrible, I had to quadruple track it and bury it in the background. But I think I kind of got there, and it sort of fit the mood of the song anyway. The song's called Velvet Elvis. It's all about a guy who his wife leaves him and takes his Velvet Elvis and everything else, and lamenting the fact that he no longer has his Velvet Elvis. But no, it's all good. Just there are some players that are I could probably get, but it just makes it so much easier when I have to depend on anybody else. Oh, one last thing, they've got this new harmonizer. They used to have a thing called a harmonizer, but it didn't do these new things. You may be aware of them. You plug your guitar into it, you plug your mic into it, it keys off your guitar and adds perfect thirds, fifths.
Holy
you can do 2 or 3 part harmony, and the great thing is it just follows your melody exactly, and your timing and the metering of everything. So,
there's no latency or anything to it.
Sorry,
no latency to the harmonizing. I mean, it would seem like there'd be some latency of time between,
No.
Wow, that's amazing.
It really is just remarkable. I mean, I was at first it was kind of a challenge to work with, because it was like all of a sudden singing harmony with other people, and you have to kind of, focus on what you're doing. But suddenly I'm singing with other people, only they're in this little box.
Wow.
But I wish I'd had it 20 years ago. It would have saved me thousands of hours of running back and forth, and trying to match up to the lead vocal and get the tempo right and the inflections. And you know how it is when you sing a lead. Sometimes you'll go up on a note, and maybe sometimes you'll go down on the same note in another chorus. But that has been just a godsend in terms of cutting down on number of people I would, if I had to. I mean, normally I would just stack all the vocals myself.
Right.
But it's a real time saver, and I think on some level actually improves the quality of the finished product. But
we mentioned both, the Velvet Elvis and then the gospel tunes you're working on. Do you find that you're still doing mostly gospel-related stuff, or are you doing quote-unquote secular stuff too, or what's the mix like for you?
When I left America, I swore I would never do any more quote rock and roll, and I meant it at the time. But ultimately, I went back and I listened to my first solo album as this contemporary Christian artist, All Things Are Possible, and I thought, this is almost like a pop album with a few kind of heavy-duty gospel songs thrown in. So I thought, who am I kidding here? I'll just go ahead and, if God gives me a song, I'm not going to sing something really obscene.
Right.
But so I just and probably on every CD or album, whatever you want to call them, there'll be one or two overtly gospel songs, but the rest of them are just basically, nice love songs, or kind of, and some of them are, heavy duty rock and roll, but they just, usually there'll be at least one, two, maybe three, if it's a 12-song set, that'll be, have some kind of gospel message or scriptural message to it. So I thought, I'm not going to just put myself in a box here.
Right.
And I, to tell you the truth, that was one of the biggest challenges. Are you taping already? Or?
Yes, I am. Yeah.
Good. Because this could be some good stuff. But when I did CCM, and sometimes I started going to Nashville. I worked with the Benson Company, and we would go into little writers' rooms and start writing. But I found that one of the biggest challenges was to not only write it's hard enough to just write a song, but to write a song that people are going to like, plus have it be, scripturally accurate and correct and not, misleading or whatever. And it was really, like almost a straitjacket of sorts to do it that way. But I did it. I did like 4 CCM albums altogether, and really put my heart and soul into them. Spent thousands of hours probably on those projects, and 2 I did in major studios. The other 2 I did with a studio I built myself. And again, I go back and I listen to them. I think, a lot of these songs just sound like pop songs, and then there'll be 3 or 4 overtly Christian songs. So I thought, I'm just not going to call these albums anything. They're just going to be, what comes out of me comes out of me. And if the Lord wants, to hand me a song that's, of a gospel nature, I'll just go ahead and record it. So, but it really took a lot of the pressure off of doing the recording. But it was really a tough assignment to, just to go in and woodshed and churn out these songs that, and I've never felt like the best songs come that way. Usually the best songs come just, you wake up and you're dreaming about a song, or they just come all at once. So that not kind of boxing myself in, and no disrespect at all to contemporary Christian music, which is really some of the finest music out there. I mean, it's well done now. I mean, the production standards are, really high. The talent's really good. The writing's really good. But I just, don't want to be boxed in by that anymore. Which, and then on the other hand, I've got my little label, 7 Mile Entertainment, and I've done 7, 10, I can't remember, albums, and I sent them to a manufacturer who shall remain nameless, but they meta-tagged every one of them religious, which I didn't figure it out till about 6 months ago, when I had never ripped or burned a song. I went to rip it and burn it and whatever you do, and it would go, Dante, blah, 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 category, religious. And I thought, wait a minute, this is not a religion, and it really annoyed me, because I thought, I wonder how many people might have looked at that and gone, oh, it's a religious album, I'm not interested. But as I said, there were quote religious songs on them, but it really, really bummed me out. In fact, I've almost called the owner and just said, what was your major malfunction there, buddy? Why did you do that? I'm trying to sell records here to everybody. I'm not trying to just narrowcast only to contemporary Christians, because for one thing, most of them would probably go, oh, this isn't religious enough.
Right.
But to turn people off from the get-go with it, only showing up under religious media, it just annoyed the heck out of me, I got to tell you.
Well, and the thing is, too, I mean, I for about a year, I managed a Christian bookstore in the Phoenix area in 1980, 81, somewhere around in there. So about the time your first Christian album came out. And, I mean, you hit it right on. I mean, at least in rock, there'd be like country rock or, the California sound, whatever. But there's not anybody getting into the Chevy Ford Beatles Stones type of argument over it. It's just, hey, I really like this or I really like that. But in contemporary Christian music, which by itself could be a lightning rod, there's the people that expect the artists to be theologians, and they better be the right kind of theologian, and all that. And I mean, funny story, I had a lady walk up to me holding an album, and I was behind the counter, and she said, "Excuse me." I said, "Yes, ma'am." She goes, "Can you tell me if this album's spirit-filled?"
Yeah.
And it's like, well, define that first, and secondly, how am I supposed to know?
Yeah. My goodness.
But that's the thing. I mean, I'm sure you probably have some horror stories to tell people confronting you. I know B.J. Thomas did. Dylan certainly went through his thing, and I mean, I think sometimes Christianity has been its own, or not Christianity, but Christians have been their own worst enemy in these.
Yeah, it's the old, they bury their wounded, and the pressure, on people like BJ, who just basically flipped out, in my opinion, later on, but they would, when you're just a lot of people who are just brand new Christians, and people are expecting them to be, like you said, theologians, that's an awful lot of pressure put on people. And Dylan, I've heard some people say he's recanted his Christianity. I don't know, it's between him and God, but it, there was obviously a great deal of excitement when people heard that he was, a brother, and he was, apparently no holds barred. He did some tours, and a lot of people freaked out because they were wanting Blowing in the Wind, and he's doing, Slow Train Coming or whatever, and or You Got to Serve Somebody. But I think at some point, I remember Pat Boone, when I first signed, it was actually to his label, which was distributed by Word, Lamb and Lion. And Pat was talking to me, and at the time he was talking, I didn't really realize he was saying it to me, but I later understood it. He goes, there's a thing where Christians can be so on fire, they're like a blast furnace, and they just frighten people. They run screaming because they're so on fire, He said, but it really, you need to be like a campfire where it's like, ooh, that looks cozy and warm, and let's go sit by the campfire and, warm our hands and roast a weenie. I don't know, but, and I realized he was actually talking to me. He was giving me some friendly advice without actually saying, by the way, Dan, you're a little bit over the top here, maybe. So, but ultimately, I've tried to be the campfire guy and not necessarily, if I'm doing the 700 Club, I let it fly, but if I'm doing an interview, I usually like to find out, what the target audience is, or what type of show it is, or if the interviewer is a believer or not. So, so that I can, I'm not going to just try to beat people over the head with a 10-pound Bible, but it's I think, both BJ and Bob Dylan and probably others who, came out just super on fire for the Lord, and then maybe had some bad experiences. When you mix Christian and business, whether it's Christian music business or whatever, there's a lot of room for problems there, and it really, I found it. It's like I'm neither fish nor fowl. Like I'm too Christian for the secular people, and I'm too secular for the Christians.
Yep.
So I think that was part of the decision to kind of just segue into just doing my own thing, and it's let the chips fall where they may. So,
well, to that point though, about the the Christianity and all that, and I've Steve Orchard and I have exchanged emails. I said, look, man, I'm not going to mirror your interview. In fact, I'm going to point to it, link to it, so people, because it's a great interview, and I don't want to replicate a lot of what he did. But one question I do want to ask, that I know that you've been asked a bazillion times, that ties to all this that you're just talking about, is for the America fans that will be reading this interview and who haven't kept up with you, say, since the early to mid 70s. Tell me why you left the band and why you started focusing on Christian music. I mean, it's a tee up to what you really want to say there. So that's
well, when I was 12 years old, I got saved. My mother, who had just gotten saved herself, came and told the entire family the gospel. I had never heard it. I'd been to a lot of churches, and I heard, be good, be a good boy, be nice, but when I heard the gospel, it absolutely resonated with me, and I got on my knees and prayed, and I knew I was a sinner at 12 already, and asked Christ into my heart and life to be my Savior, and but then the years kind of drifted on. I got my late teens, went away to college, and just drifted away from any semblance of acting like a Christian. But when we formed the band America, we were living in London, and I went into my own little room, and I got on my knees, and I said, Lord, if you'll make this group a success, I will use it as a platform to tell other people about you. And I never told another soul. Well, within a year of praying that prayer, we had a #1 album and #1 single around the world, and just hit me like a ton of bricks one day. Bam! God answered your prayer. Now you need to live up to your end of the bargain.
Ruh-roh.
Yeah, so I kind of, not half-heartedly, but I tried to share the gospel with Dooney and Jerry. They weren't interested. I tried to share it with some other people, didn't want to know. So I just kind of withdrew into my shell as a heathen, and then became just a practicing hedonist. So for the next 7 years, I am just living, La Vida Loco to the max. And the turning point came for me when I'm living in a $1 million house in Malibu overlooking the sea. I've got the fancy schmancy cars in the driveway, a beautiful wife, the hot tub, the whole 9 yards. I'm just walls covered with gold platinum albums, Grammy on my piano, and yet inside I was so lost and just so in deep despair, because it's like, wait a minute, all this stuff's supposed to make me feel good, and it's not doing it. I'm lost, and I knew there was darkness, inside. And I remember my mother, when I did get saved, just kind of came back to me. She said, "And son, if any time, you wander away from Jesus, He will always take you back. He will always take you back." And so I got on my knees in my beautiful home by the sea and just cried out a prayer of repentance. And I said, "Lord, I have sinned, grievously against you. I don't need all this stuff. This stuff is just, it's not doing it. I want you to be now my Lord as well as my Savior. And I want to live my life, in glory, to glorify you." Within about 3 months, our house burned in the fire. I'm out of the band. It's like going through divorce. Everything was tied up. And it was probably the lowest ebb of my life on a material level, which 6 months earlier I was at the absolute, apogee, crescendo of life as a material person. But was at the lowest ebb spiritually. And then suddenly the coin flipped over, and I'm just, on fire, wanting to preach the gospel. And I had this incredible idea. I thought, I'm going to make an album of songs about the Lord, with modern type music, not just, old standard kind of
Southern
piano
gospel.
thumping. I thought I invented contemporary Christian music. Little did I know there was this huge, industry already out there. But they were so separate that I would go to places where there were people in CCM, and I would be introduced. "Oh, this is Dan Peake. He's from the group America." And one guy goes, "Is that the juggling act that performs in Vegas?"
Oh, brother.
They didn't know who I was. I didn't know who they were. But all I knew was I wanted to fulfill and my promise to the Lord. It was like when I did pray that prayer of rededication, some people would say that's really when I was converted. I don't want to split hairs. All I know was I knew then I wanted God as the central focus of my life, not the material stuff. But it was like God just said, "Okay, now you can live up to your promise." And so I embarked on a series of things, and God put the right people in my place to be able to make all things are possible. And so suddenly there I was able to share the glory of God and explain, the gospel, and explain what God had done for me in my life, and saved a hopeless wretch like me, and it was just like a huge weight was lifted off of me, because I had suffered tremendous guilt from living this double life, deep down inside I'm a Christian, but on the outside I am just, like Keith Richards, only a little bit younger. So that was the turning point, and I left the band. band. I did the album. It was nominated for a Grammy. All Things Are Possible. The song got huge, monstrous airplay. It was actually in the top 5 adult contemporary charts, top 5 of the adult contemporary charts for 2 years in a row. So it was just on some level, a groundbreaking album. BJ had made his Coming Home or Going Home or whatever it was, but All Things Are Possible really just was a breakout record, and then it was time to follow up. But long story short, I really had butted heads with the guy that produced it, whose name shall remain nameless. But
I know who he is.
I ended up, like 3 years later, thinking, it was just something I heard Pat Robertson say. It was like, you got to bury the hatchet with somebody. If the Lord's got stuff for you to do, you need to do it. And so I just called him up and said, hey, let's, we didn't get along, but let's just bury the hatchet here. And so I made the next album was Doer of the Word. Did that, and it got some nice airplay and stuff. It wasn't the breakout thing like All Things Are Possible. And then did that with him, and it was, again, very, very strained, very stressed. It was a great record. I take a lot of pride in the record. But after that, I was living not far from Nashville and started basically living in Nashville, and just went to the Benson Company and just, kept pestering people till I finally got a deal with Benson and made a couple of records for them, Lecture Voice and Crossover. And then after that, I started put together bands and started touring. I mean, sometimes overseas, Australia, New Zealand, Malaysia. I mean, you name it. I was out there, and I would play the America stuff. That's what most people came to hear. But I would always, throw in the CCM stuff and give a short testimony, and then usually a pastor would come out and give an altar call afterwards. So it was. But as time went on, I was going to segue into just a pure country career, but all of a sudden one day I sat down and my marriage was really on the rocks, really suffering, because I've been on the road for so long, and it really puts a strain, even as a Christian. I mean, it's very stressful in a marriage. And I thought, we used to do probably 290 dates a year as America. If I go do country, I'm looking at 322 dates a year
easily.
and I thought I can't go down that road again. I spent the last 20 years touring, and I've had enough. So my wife and I reconciled. We decided to move, so we moved to the Caribbean. We just kind of wanted a fresh start, and so kind of hung up the recording studio thing and everything else, but the irony was, because of the situation, I just started writing song after song after song, book after book after book. So it was a great way to, without trying, without having pressure, put on me, you got to deliver an album every 6 months, just to be able to stockpile a huge amount of material and then ultimately put it to tape or CD or whatever you want to call it. And so that worked out pretty good.
Did you know, over at Benson, or have a chance to meet Phil Johnson while you were dealing with them?
Why does that name ring a bell?
He was with them for quite a while. He was the one that wrote Give Them All to Jesus and Didn't Bring Us This Far to Leave Us. He produced Swaggart before Swaggart took everything to his own studio and to the hookers next door. Sorry, that was tacky. I'm sorry, but he worked with Dottie and Reba Rambo. It was mostly kind of a Southern gospel, but he did a lot of. His brother-in-law was the piano player for Dallas Home and all that. So there was, it was kind of a tight type family there. He's over, gosh, I forget the name of the label now, but it's with the label that the Oak Ridge Boys are on, and he's their executive producer. And,
Really?
I haven't talked to him in years. I sound like I know him and talk to him all the time. It's been a lot of years since I've talked to Phil, but I was their guest for the Dove Awards in '78, and he was just always
I'm sure I met him. The name rings a bell, but I can't swear to you.
It doesn't mean. I'm just curious if you met him at the time or not.
Was he at one time president of Benson?
No, he was just like their primary or lead go-to in-house producer. It's back in the days when they had their own studio. Their Big Circle or Great Circle Sound or something like that.
Yeah, they had a huge, gorgeous studio.
Yeah, I got to go in it because I was there for the '78 Dove Awards, like I said, and then he was working with Andrews Blackwood and Company, Terry Blackwood and Sherman Andrews, that used to be with the Imperials with Elvis, broke away and did their own. They formed a duo there, and they were working on an album at that beautiful studio, fascinating studio. But I don't even know if it's still there or not. But anyway, he was their lead go-to in-house producer there, and but back in the days when gospel record companies did that kind of thing. So,
hey, Randy.
Yes, sir.
Would this ruin your life if we took about a 15-minute break?
No, go right
and
ahead.
I'll call you back in 15 minutes.
Sounds like a plan.
Okay.
Catch you then.
Bye.